Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a look at one of the most famous, heavily debated, and honestly misunderstood texts in human history, the Voynich manuscript. For centuries, people have looked at its strange script and bizarre drawings and just assumed it was some magical text, maybe an elaborate hoax or the work of a lone eccentric. But recent data analysis completely shatters that narrative. We're going to look at the Voynich manuscript not as a mystical artifact, but as a centuries-old crime scene of deliberately erased intellectual property.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where the story gets incredibly fascinating. When we look at the physical manuscript, there are glaring holes. Pages are missing. Entire sections are just gone. Now, for a long time, historians assumed this was just the result of time, accidental damage over the centuries. But what if it wasn't an accident at all? What if the manuscript is missing its most crucial pages because someone intentionally redacted them to hide something incredibly powerful?
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll establish the physical mystery of those missing pages. Then we'll introduce a groundbreaking mathematical model that finally decoded the system. From there, we'll reconstruct exactly what was erased, uncover a massive twist in the data, and finally, look at the surviving safe shell we're left with today. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Missing Pages Mystery. The gaps in the physical record.
Before we can figure out what was taken, we really have to look at the physical reality of the manuscript sitting at Yale University right now. It consists of 116 vellum leaves structured across 20 distinct sections, or what archivists call quires. It's highly visual, with an illustration density of about 80%. But when you look at the binding structure, there are massive, highly specific gaps. We're missing specific folios in quires 6, 8, 9, 10, and 15. And quire 20? It's a total loss, completely gone. So we have a lot of the manuscript, sure, but the parts that are missing represent highly targeted extractions.
To actually make sense of these gaps, researchers used a mathematical system dynamics model called Arion to map the manuscript's internal logic. And as the source material states, Arion identified the missing pages by mapping procedural gaps, and the missing content is exactly what a monastery or Jesuit archivist would remove. These missing pages aren't just random wear and tear. They represent a deliberate, calculated sanitization of the text.
Section 2. The Mathematical Smoking Gun. The Arion Telemetry.
Now, what's really interesting here is how they figured this out. Researchers didn't just look at the pictures. They ran the manuscript's internal logic through that Arion model. When the engine mapped the thermal loops, the tissue fixation, and the archival suspension processes hidden in the workflow, the procedural variance returned was exactly zero, literally 0.0. So, what does zero variance actually mean? Well, in system dynamics, a procedural variance of zero means this wasn't some experimental text. It wasn't theory, and it definitely wasn't symbolic or magical writing. It is mathematically confirmed definitive proof of a mature, fixed, standardized workflow. The Voynich manuscript was a working manual, a strict standard operating procedure for biological preservation.
But the math actually goes even further. When computing the system's hyperbolicity, the unified codex equation returned a Jacobian determinant value of negative 66,544.0809, which sounds completely abstract, I know, until you realize what it actually means. Let's translate that abstract math into visceral reality. A massive negative Jacobian determinant means the system is tightly constrained. This wasn't the work of a lone crazy thinker scribbling away in a cave somewhere. This proves extreme structural boundaries. The procedures were guild-regulated. This system belonged to a rigid, strictly regulated institution. Think Benedictine monastic medicine or Cistercian hydraulic engineering. It's institutional science, mathematically validated.
Section 3. Reconstructing the redacted core. What was actually erased?
So if this was a mature, highly regulated scientific manual, what highly potent information was deemed too dangerous or maybe too valuable to keep in the final copy? And this brilliantly illustrates the forensic map of the procedural gaps Arion found. By looking at the surviving workflow, the model reconstructed the missing pieces. In the botanical section, toxic and lethal extracts are missing. In the hydraulics section, the active boilers and thermal loops are gone. The cosmological wheels are missing the master stability calendars, and the pharmaceutical section has literally been stripped of its primary fixation formulas.
We're talking about the erasure of incredibly advanced, dangerous, and high-value engineering and chemistry. Scrubbed from the text were high-potency narcotics used for deep sedation, advanced hydraulic loops required for gravity-fed thermal sterilization, the exact environmental timers telling you when to execute these procedures based on temperature and humidity, and the exact stoichiometric tables, the precise chemical ratios required to completely embalm and fix biological tissue without it rotting.
Section 4. The Equilibrium Twist. The unexpected truth of the math.
When researchers reconstructed this missing core, they totally assumed that injecting massive variables like high thermal heat and toxic chemistry would result in chaos, high variance bouncing, which in physical terms basically means rot and putrefaction. But the mathematical reality completely rejected that assumption. The system instantly crushed those high-energy inputs into an absolute flatline. Perfect zero-variance stasis. It wasn't a chaotic experiment. It was a flawlessly calibrated technology forcing biological matter into absolute, unchanging equilibrium.
And this leads to the most staggering realization of this entire explainer. Quote, "The Voynich manuscript is not missing its pages because the formulas were unpredictable or explosive. It is missing its pages because the formulas were perfect."
Let me walk you through this unredacted monastic engine step by step. This is what the book originally taught. Step 1. Select toxic botanicals to act as equilibrium agents. Step 2. Run hydraulic purification inside a narrow, strictly controlled thermal band. Step 3. Align the timing to cyclical windows where environmental variance is 0. Step 4. Apply exact chemical ratios tuned flawlessly to specific tissue types. And Step 5. Suspend the biological material in inert media to permanently arrest all decay. The erased pages were the equilibrium keys that made this perfect stasis possible.
Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds. The surviving safe shell. What they left behind.
So we know what was taken. What exactly is the physical manuscript sitting in the Yale Library today? When you juxtapose them, it becomes incredibly clear. It's just a safe shell. It contains the basic infrastructure: mild, benign ingredients, passive settling pools, partial timing, and non-lethal recipes. But the missing folios, the parts deliberately extracted, were the core engine. They held the lethal potency, the advanced thermal engineering, the master operational calendar, and the true chemical fixation ratios.
The absolute core takeaway you need to remember is this: the manuscript was sanitized. The removed pages weren't just lost to time, they were the crown jewels of a 15th century monastic guild. Whether removed by the original guildmasters to protect their proprietary intellectual property, or extracted by later Jesuit archivists who recognized how incredibly valuable and dangerous this perfect equilibrium math was, this is fundamentally a story of strictly controlled institutional knowledge.
Which leaves us with a rather profound and honestly a bit unsettling question to wrap up our explainer today. If the Voynich manuscript we have, the one that has baffled cryptographers for a century, is just the safe, sanitized version, what other world-changing institutional secrets, what other perfect technologies have been intentionally erased from our history? Think about that for a second. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the history you've been handed.